Brilliant. Thank you. I've arrived. That's good. A few technical problems there. Thank you very much, Ben, for that introduction. So I'm just going to now share my screen. So my presentation is about why the body matters. This is how I'm feeling right now, because I do literally feel like a fish out of water. This channel is very alien to me. My work is very experiential, and that is about going through various organic processes that engage the body in a holistic way, and that is about amplifying our physical and sensate awareness. I am an expressionist, and I'm really interested in human narratives. I have a fascination with people and the way that people communicate, or what they choose to express and in what way they express it. I've been working with performing artists for a long time, and I equip them with tools to become more articulate, expressive and embodied communicators. And in placing the body at the centre of my artistic work, I've sought to create a language that transcends cultural boundaries. There's been some really interesting talk today about placing the human at the centre of organisations, a much more humanist approach, and about the importance of trust and communication. So that sits at the heart of what I want to talk about today. Performers need to be compelling enough to hold audiences. They need to be able to engage the imagination of the audience, and they need to affect the individuals in that audience. We need to effectively, as performers, draw the audience in, and we need to connect with them. It's a very dynamic relationship. And I think that empathy is the linchpin of that relationship. It's what makes us different from machines. And it's what makes us uniquely and beautifully human. One of the first offerings I make to my students when I work with them is an invitation to be vulnerable and open, which is very counterintuitive for us. We guard and protect ourselves for all sorts of reasons, for very good reasons in many cases. But it's important because it allows us to be really responsive. It allows us to be open, and it allows us to follow our impulses, which are obviously intrinsic in what it is to be a performer. But I believe that those skills are the same or equally as important for leaders, who also need strong interpersonal skills. And we can't really connect with other people if we're kind of holding something back, if we're holding something of ourselves back. Leaders need to be able to inspire confidence, and they need to convince, they need to take people with them on the journey. And so their ability to connect effectively paves the way for success. And I believe that the body can be our greatest resource in this regard. So talking about the importance of reading the body, as Siham alluded just a moment ago, the body language is a primary channel through which we read what's happening when we're with other people. It's how we orientate ourselves in the world. It's how we've evolved over millennia. And the body is transmitting messages moment to moment through in quite subtle ways often, but also in the broader body language. And a lot of this is unconscious, but we as humans are hardwired to read and respond to those messages. It's how we gauge how we're doing. It's how we assess what strategies to employ going forward. And interestingly, as again Siham alluded, that if there's an incongruency between what we're seeing in a person's body and the language they're using, regardless of how brilliantly curated that language is, it's going to fall on deaf ears, or there could be we will not be so convincing, basically. So how we embody what it is that we're trying to communicate on a physical level really does count. Gesture, both expressive and everyday gesture, and touch are deeply embedded in the way that we connect and communicate as human beings. Interestingly, as small children, we're really freely expressive. We're naturally expressive and playful, and we naturally follow our impulses. And there's a real honesty in young children, and it's a wonderful joy to watch. But sadly, as we get older, we tend to suppress a lot of our impulses for all sorts of reasons. But the problem is that we can detect in a person when there's a suppressed impulse. We might not be able to process exactly what's going on, but we can feel that there's this energetic blockage. And because we all have physical tells or behaviours that reveal themselves in response to these hidden impulses. So it's not just the wider body language that's signalling if we're feeling anxious, or if we're feeling guarded, or if we're feeling relaxed. If we watch somebody closely, we can see it reflected in the detail of the hands and fingers. So congruency is really important, and that's when we are most empowered and connected and impactful, which is what we're all looking for. So this is when our gestures are matching our thoughts and meaning. It's when our intonation is underpinned with our intention, and our presence and our energy and our posture are all aligned. And this is when we're most embodied and compelling. So we effectively can't read people's minds, only their bodies and the quality of their actions. Interestingly, our bodies hold our history and store our experience, not just in the muscles and the nervous system, but in the fascia as well. And our experiences often manifest as habits of holding. And if these are negative, or we don't pay attention to them, or we don't have strategies in place to recalibrate and nurture the body, then there can be serious long-term effects. Dis-ease over, or stress over a sustained period of time, if you imagine that you've got cortisol levels really, really high, this is going to potentially cause disease, and could in worst cases, develop into serious physical trauma. So it's in our interests to become body aware and have it as part of our self-care. If we're talking about what makes us engaging, dynamic and convincing, we need to think about presence. And presence is an active state. It's easy to get sign-blinded by the idea of charisma. We'd all like to be charismatic, one of those people that lights up the room, but that's only one part of the story, and there are ways in which we can amplify our personal appeal, but it's more about what this dynamic is between us and them, or us and everyone else, in an audience of sorts, or our colleagues or our peers, whoever it is that we're interfacing with. It's about placing our attention on them, and it's about how we're perceiving them. So it's not about us, we're the most important person in the room. It's not about our ego. It's about what they need, what they want, and that involves a generosity of spirit. It involves literally opening up the heart, drinking them in, welcoming them in, making them feel included, and making that transaction feel like it's a really important and imperative moment, and we need to be really fully present to that. It's about our intention to connect, and interestingly, there are ways in which we can spice that up. We can apply transitive verbs or active verbs on what it is that we're saying, and that we can, and they're like tactics, and we can, for instance, we can decide that we want to tease them in this moment, or we want to inspire them in this moment, or we want to rally them in this moment, or intrigue them in this moment. And they are, because they're active and they have a dynamic inherent quality, we start to find that there's variety in the way that we're delivering. And it also informs, or can inform, our larger body language and our gesturing, because they have their own inherent qualities. They're physical, essentially, because they're active. So these are things that we can use as tools to kind of help vitalize our delivery and our interactions. So it's not just the words that we speak, it's how we say them. So body, breath and voice, they're all interlinked. And so we need to also expand our bandwidth vocally. It's if I were to speak in a very regular way on one tone, you would soon zone out. So I have to be cognizant of how I'm using the instrument of the voice to keep you glued, to keep you interested. And I need to use my full range. I need to use my upward inflection, and I need to use my lower, lower inflections, and I need to speed up maybe or slow down, dropping a pause in at key moments. These are all ways in which we can kind of manage what it is that we're saying and keep that delivery really spicy. And that's also a way in which we can kind of amplify how compelling we are in the space. And that's just essentially about dynamics. So we can't talk about being riveting unless we to some extent talk about posture. And posture and self-image are, again, intrinsically connected. We all know about posturing. Alphas do it all the time. The way that we physically hold ourselves tells the world who we are. It reveals how we want to be perceived, and it reflects how we think and feel about ourselves. So, for example, if I were to sit slumped, my shoulders curled over, I'm collapsing the whole of the front of the body, I'm looking down, I might be even guarding myself and protecting myself here, I'm not very anchored, I allow there to be a slack quality in the body, or worse, tension. Eventually, I'm going to feel melancholy. Just doing that physically will change my state. Why? Because I'm shutting down the whole of the front of the body, basically. I'll just move back a bit. I work with the chakra systems quite a lot as well. And so what we've got here is we've got our heart chakra, and this is about our capacity to love and be loved. And we need that radiating, we need that open, we need to let it sing and breathe. And similarly, our ego and our self-identity and our sense of self, our self-confidence and sense of self-image is in here. So if you imagine that's compressed or imploded or collapsed, the impact is going to be not only emotional, but also mental. Good posture is not only vital for our physical health, it affects our mental and emotional well-being. But there are visualizations and exercises you can do to kind of correct this and to rebalance everything. Good news. So just pinning down what good posture is, and there are simple shifts we can do internally, as well as bigger external adjustments we can do to help with this. But actors will talk about alignment all the time. Dancers obviously do as well. But it's really about poise. It's about having an open, centered, balanced ease in being. Being comfortable, looking like we're comfortable in our own skin. But it's also the alignment of the feet into the hips, into the spine and into the head, so that we're not, we're not out of alignment here. We can work with this invisible cord at the crown of the head just to get that sense of suspension in the upper body, so we're not compressing. And everything is singing and breathing and stacked on itself. So there is no effort, actually. And the spine is really crucial because it needs to be flexible. So we don't have this rigidity. And we've paid attention to tension, which we store and hold in the body. Again, sometimes we're not even aware of it. We need to release that on a regular basis. And we are grounded. So again, if we're grounded, we have natural gravitas. In fact, we can't have gravitas unless we are grounded. So that's about the positioning of the feet under the hips. It's about connecting with the floor through the feet. It's working with spreading your roots down. We have an energetic center here, and we think we radiate it down through the feet like tree roots, hence the picture of the tree, great role models, but also it's radiating up, so it's not at the expense of this upper realm, because this sort of cultivates this sense of receptivity and awareness and this real 3D focus quality. And the pelvis is dynamized. This is another physical center that needs to be switched on and vital. So we're commanding and embracing space, which again imbues us with confidence in the same way that I was talking about opening up the front of the body. We're greeting space, we're commanding space, we're opening ourselves up, and we look like we mean business. We look like a safe pair of hands. And people will respond to that. But it also changes how we feel. So the other thing is that's influencing our breath, and so we need to be breathing fully and deeply, and this will also counteract our nerves and emotions. So emotions, big one there. We're complex, and already, you know, Trisha's graph about the different emotions people go through when they're dealing with big seismic changes in the workplace. It's a real thing. We are constantly experiencing one emotional state or another. Emotions sit in layers. And also in spectrum, so we can be in an emotional state at sort of like 2 out of 10, or overwhelmed at 10 out of 10. And emotion is energy, and energy and emotion are contagious often. So we can get triggered by other people's states, we can get triggered by events, and we can get triggered by things like the thoughts in our head. I don't know about you, but my inner critic is very persuasive. I've got self-doubt and comparison and fear and anxiety running very high a lot of the time. So, yeah, it's seductive. And sluggish energy is another thing. We're dealing with machines a lot of the time and tech channels, and so we're not as active as maybe we could be. Our focus might be dissipated, we've got bad postural habits kicking in, and which is in turn affecting our breathing patterns, which become inhibited, and all of these affect our mood. So yeah, we're getting triggered, but here the body really is our champion, and it gives us control. It can put us back in the driving seat. We can kick start or coax ourselves into a journey or into a new emotional spectrum through physical means. If you imagine that our body is covered in invisible buttons, I like to think of it like this, which is representative of the experiences we've had in our life, in our history, and some of them are very subtle, some of them are really internal, but obviously as actors we need to figure out where they are, because we've got to hit some really intense emotional states at the drop of a hat often, and I, in my experience, I haven't had the benefit of psyching myself up in my dressing room. I've done a quick change after doing Lady Macbeth. I've got to come on as a witch, you know, and I'm double toil and troubling it, and I have to hit the ground running. So what I've cultivated over the years is these processes which allow us to literally plug in, plug out, and clear. And we then start to understand that there are means by which we can, you know, fake it till we make it, literally. Because our physical form and energy affects our psychology and then starts to release certain chemicals, or can, and our physicality informs our breath, and breath is the gateway to emotion. So quite frankly, I wish I'd had these tools earlier in my life, because it would have saved a lot of heartache. So if we talk about the body mind, what are these tools? Well, stretching and opening the body. We don't do it very much. We're not taught how to do it, but it's so crucial for our well-being. Power poses. It sounds cheesy, but they really work. Add an affirmation, a positive affirmation on top of that, and you really are changing your state. emotive postures. So, you know, breathing into them, working with imagery or you know, a feeling. And music, instant atmosphere changer, and can change our mood because we release endorphins when we're moving as well. And as I said, the use of imagery and affirmations. With regard to breath, where we're breathing really counts. We can be breathing in a shallow way up here somewhere, or we can be breathing deeper down into our bellies, and we can decide and focus on shifting our breath. We can also determine the duration of the breath. And we can use counting systems to try and help expand that breath. Some people breathe in a very shallow way. They don't even know how to breathe deeply. But, you know, these are techniques we can learn. And why they're important is because they can, you know, if people are very anxious, changing how you breathe really does counteract that level of anxiety, because it calms the nervous system down. And there are certain postures you can do in tandem with that. Breath pathways are also part of that, like are we breathing in through the nose or through the mouth or vice versa, all makes a difference. Power of the eyes. Our eyes are transmitting all of the time. They reflect thoughts and they reflect emotions. And we can tell when someone's unplugged, we can tell when they've drifted off, we can tell when they're having a judgment or forming a question, we can tell when they are present with us and when they're not. It's an energetic thing, but it is reflected in the eyes. But they are also our filter on the world, interestingly, and we can literally have a point of view on the world, and some people can get stuck inside this point of view. So there's an interesting exercise I do again with my students. It's really fun, accessible exercise, and it is literally like flicking a switch. So we decide that everybody in the room is going to have suspicious eyes. You just change the quality of the eyes, and everything you look at you're suspicious of. It could be the phone, it could be the space, it could be the others, and we explore that for a bit, and then we might move on to judgmental. I wouldn't recommend staying there for very long, it's really quite hideous, and we move on to, say, nervous or curious, and all the while I'm asking them to notice differences in their breath, what kind of impulses come up, their thoughts, how the energy shifts, and what kind of awarenesses change. And because they do, they really, really do, and it's so immediate. It's that whole thing of, you know, the body leading everything else. And if we imagine then that all of those people, you know, the curious person and the judgmental person and the nervous person, all go to the same party, they're talking to the same people, they're in the same space, and yet they are having completely different experiences, because our perception of the world affects how we experience it. Our filter on the world is a choice, but we maybe sometimes forget that. So I would recommend trying curious eyes with a little internal smile and see what happens. The world will be your oyster, I assure you. So just recapping a little bit on some of the things I've mentioned. The first three are fairly obvious, and I fully appreciate that not everybody has the capacity to shift and change what's going on behind them. We're all quite challenged at the moment with the setups that we've got. But just some pointers there about energy and how important that is, and making sure that you're awake and alert and firing on all cylinders. And that you know we stay present, really, really present, and that we're grounded. We've spent some time grounding ourselves, especially if we're nervous. It's very important. So work with that tree imagery. Spend 2 minutes just centering yourself and getting the sense of your energy radiating down through your legs into the floor. Drop and lengthen the breath to calm the nervous system. With regard to posture, you know, the importance of the spine. I don't know if anybody knows about spine rolls. They're a game changer. I recommend you do them every day. They keep the spine flexible, and that I really believe, brings us good health and longevity. If you're sitting, use your sits bones rather than sitting at the back and slumping and collapsing. So really just keep checking in with what your posture's doing, and allowing the spine to really sing, and think about that invisible cord. Eyes, warm them up. You know, really sort of be generous with the way that you're connecting. It's hard because most of the time we're just looking into the void, looking at a little green light, but there are people there. And you know, we have to really apply our imagination to be welcoming them in and drinking them in. And going back to, I can't remember who said it, but this idea of being really curious about who our audience is, because it matters. It matters. That connection is really important. Lastly, permission to express yourself, and maybe use your hands a little bit more than you think you would naturally tend to do. So lastly, how does the human body exist in our increasingly tech-dominated world? It's a challenge. Excuse me. For people like me in particular, I'm kinesthetic, and I'm visual, yes, and I'm auditory, yes, but I'm also kinesthetic. I'm, you know, I like the touch and feel of things. I like the body experience of things. It's how I function, and my senses are also something I really rely on, as I'm sure other people do. And yet these channels are not stimulated at all in this new way of working. Increasingly as well, we're seeing that people are developing hypersensitivity to technology. Young people are struggling with interpersonal skills face to face because they're spending so much time online. And that is also causing mental health issues. And I know Rob's going to be talking about that later. We're not designed for where we're heading. That's my feeling. And yet it's moving fast. So we're standing at a threshold of major evolutionary change. And we have an opportunity to reevaluate how we live, how we work, and how we educate. Post-COVID, I think leaders have to be creative and conscious about how technology is employed, and consider how it impacts the humans in their organisation, and also make sure there's adequate support for those people who are working remotely, because their setups may not be very helpful or conducive. It may not be the utopia everybody thinks it is, although for some people I'm sure that will really be a game changer. In other words, one size doesn't fit all, and it can cause stress. But we need to be having these conversations now. And I think it's important for leaders to really consult and connect with who they've got in their organisation, and figure out how people is going to optimise people's engagement and efficiency. Working virtually, I think we're going to have to make an effort with our communication. I don't think we can rely on just being a talking head, being really minimal. We've got to up our game and give a lot more, because we're not getting those usual touchstones and clues that we normally get when we're in face-to-face conversation. And that's we need that for relating and connecting. I mean, interestingly, in social media, I use emojis quite a lot because I need that stuff. You know, I like to express myself, and I think humans do. So just to wrap up, really, to build and sustain healthy humanistic ecologies, we've got to pay attention to the body, because the body, mind, and emotions are all intrinsically linked. It's not just good housekeeping. If we negate the body and become disembodied, then we're essentially dehumanizing ourselves, and that is numbing our ability to empathize, which is at the root of everything. Accepting our own humanity leads us to feel compassion for others, and that is the future we should be aiming for. Going back to Margaret's point of being flexible and adaptive and responsive and creative in how we're going to address our uncertain future, I think the body really helps us there. So I'm interested in what other people think about that question. How does the human body exist in our increasingly tech-dominated, uncertain future? But that is all from me. I don't know if anybody's got any questions.
Thank you, Gail. That was amazing. Hope everybody enjoyed it. We've had plenty of activity in the chat, but yeah, plenty of energy there, and I definitely resonate with your last point about we're communicating remotely via a screen, and that you haven't got the depth, you haven't got the kind of everything's in 2D, everything's flat, and it is really tricky. Um, I'm interested actually. When did we start becoming disembodied and disconnected from our kind of bodies and our emotions? How did we get to here? Because everything which you raised, we've got access to amazing tools within our body. We don't have to go out to shops to buy them. We don't have to kind of invest huge amounts of money. These things are accessible to us all. So when did that happen, and why have we become disconnected?
I don't know. I think that I think it's something that could be addressed better in education. I think that there is a difference between exercise and being body aware. I think to some extent, there are some types of exercise that are kind of increasing that nourishment. The yoga spectrum, for example, there's a lot of embodied practice there and somatic sort of awarenesses that are part of that. But I think a lot of young people are turned off exercise. They feel like they don't relate to the standard forms of exercise, and so they I think it starts quite early on, and especially because more and more people are not playing in the streets as much, they're on their machines, and so that's how they're communicating. They're getting used to this virtual channel, and that is effectively forming the bedrock of how people connect. So it's a problem, but I really believe that people would benefit from the kind of processes that I use, because although they're focused on, or they're predominantly focused for performers, actually they're life skills. It's about active physical listening and being present and being able to sensitize ourselves to tuning in to our own body. And our body is our house.
Mm.
It's like we've got to care about it and pay attention to it. And as I keep saying, it really is holistic. It really is, what we're doing physically informs, or is it, there's a sort of dialogue going on the whole time between our brain, our thoughts, and I know you talk brilliantly about that in your session. The different ways of the two halves of the brain, and how we've created this world, but this other realm of stuff that we're not really drawing on so much, and a lot of that is the creative, responsive, imaginative realm, really.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Tina made a point earlier on about the active presence really resonated with her. The voice, body, using energy and posture to lift yourself and make a statement. So she raised that as a kind of really important takeaway. And Siam as well. So creating the space for being comfortable in silence as well,
Yeah.
and just kind of just feeling and connecting with your body, and sort of dialing down the everything else, all the noise around us, which I thought was a
And
great.
yeah, and that takes a little bit of courage, because we tend to want to kind of fix things, or we want to keep reassure ourselves in some ways, and just taking a breath and finding that stillness is really key. I work with the 5 rhythms quite a lot, and stillness is really an anchoring state, which happens at the end of this 5 rhythm cycle that you do. It's a free movement meditation thing, and this stillness is really profound every time I do it with people, because it's so, you've kind of connected with yourself on such a deep level. You've gone on a journey, it's palpable, but there is a super heightened awareness as well. It's not just internal, it's external. And what after doing that and having go through the experience the first time, we start to realize that though we recognize when they're in play, those states, those energetic states, and stillness is really important for, if for kind of galvanizing that sense of authority and you know, capacity to really embrace whatever is happening in the room, but more silently. You know, I can absorb, I'm receptive, I'm seeing, you know, I'm understanding, and I'm speaking when I need to speak, because it matters when I speak, because you know, coupled with this sense of groundedness, and authority, it gives what we're saying more potency.
Mm. Yeah, I agree. And I think in terms of awareness, Jack made a point. You know, there's a need to learn to control our subconscious and maybe unlearn some of its natural actions and reactions. And CM responded that yeah, maybe we need to just be better at kind of learning and listening to what the subconscious is trying to tell us. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, when I was talking about blocking, you know, suppressing our impulses, you know, obviously some impulses are, we suppress for good reason, but many are there's no reason why we should be suppressing them, and we're often, you know, there's peer pressure or there's social pressures that kick in at certain times in our lives, or appropriateness is another thing that we kind of battle with, and but. But there is an authenticity about owning how you feel. It's not that you have to be you know, emotionally out of control when you do that. There's just, it's an acknowledgement. It's just it's empathy for yourself. It's like, I'm struggling with this. I know something's happening for me right now, and I need some time and space to just process it, but I just want to kind of I would like to own it. And I think it's okay for us to say that. I think it's important, because we're human. We're not a machine, you know. And going back to Margaret's point, is we are unpredictable. We are triggered in all sorts of ways, and we need to, in a way, be kinder to one another. It's okay to not know. It's okay to be a bit lost. It's okay to be anxious, you know. And I think a healthy culture sort of accommodates that need in people. I mean, interestingly, with this whole COVID setup that we've had, this, you know, big crisis that we've been dealing with, there's been an amazing connectivity and creative use of technology with people, and it's so heartening, because you realize that people need that sense of connection. It's so embedded in who we are, as you know, what we are. So yeah, I mean, I just I think it's
Yeah.
important.
Yeah. Well, so there was quite a bit of interest in some of these techniques, and these might be techniques which people haven't heard of before. So, have you got any tips as to where any of our sort of attendees can go and look up some of these techniques which you alluded to and develop them further?
Yeah, I mean, there are some in neuro-linguistic programming. There's some quite interesting processes there. It talks a lot about the representational systems of, you know, auditory, visual, sensory and kinesthetic, and gustatory, and we all process information in different ways. And the NLP workbook that I've been looking at is really useful. That's by Joseph O'Connor, for example. That's really useful. The chakra system might not be for everybody, but it is interesting. It's really interesting. And if you're that way inclined, then there's a great book called The Lucid Body by Faye Simpson. And just in terms of the practices, there are some practitioners out there. They're not easy to find, actually, sadly, unless you're sort of signed up to some sort of program of training. But that could be a resource that I can make available to people afterwards. If they're interested, they could get in touch, and I can point them in the right direction.
Great stuff. Well, we've got about 5 minutes, so just a couple of questions, unless any further ones come in. So, from a team perspective, what exercises could teams do to build good connections amongst themselves, with the physical distance in mind as well?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I know that Seaham was sort of talking about that. You know, the importance of building trust is really crucial. I think that there are some exercises that you can do which are about patterns, or I mean, some of these are better physically, but you can also do them verbally. There's also some sort of physical mirroring sort of exercises. Again, workshop situations are best, so some of those I think are better to try and do in person. Remotely, I think it's tricky. I think we've still got to figure out what that is. And as a physical practitioner, I'm still trying to figure out how to um, make effective use of the way that we can work with technology to replace or substitute what we would normally experience in a space with other people, because there is the energetic exchange is not present, and this is part of the problem. So I think that checking in with each other verbally is probably about as much as you can do.
Mm.
Yeah, I think it's a conundrum. But I would say that I think that going forward, just in terms of what sort of choices are made about how much teams do physically connect, I would say that it's worth making those moments count, all those times count, and making sure that you're consolidating as much as possible this sense of connectivity through physical means. And that there are some exercises that you can do which are about patterns that you simple call and response, or working with balls and rhythm, where everybody is dependent on one another, and it's a team effort, and it's about rhythm and flow, and everybody's contribution is exactly equal, and you layer on different patterns, which some of which are vocal, some of which are moving from place to place, some of which are catching things. They're quite fun. We did those a lot when we were preparing for Wolf of Wall Street, because it was so complex. The environment was so changeable. We were completely and utterly dependent on each other in really unpredictable circumstances. And so we had to build a certain agility of focus for those. But they were very helpful. And I think those sorts of things could be quite fun and be productive as well.
Sounds good. And I guess one quick last point for all of the leaders who are tuning in. Is there anything which you can kind of give if there's, if the leader was about to give a talk, a big talk, they were nervous, they had a few minutes to kind of compose their thoughts before, is there a little kind of takeaway tip which you can help, which you could share with them and help them calm their nerves and prepare for it?
I think the most important, it's paying attention to your breath is crucial. The adrenaline will kick in, it just will, but counteracting that by making sure that you're really grounded. So paying attention to how you're I would do some standing work to begin with, and or lying down work, and you basically just focus on the breath and make sure that you're measuring that breath, so expanding the length of the breath, in and out, and expanding the exhale beyond the inhale will certainly calm everything down. I think thinking about placing the attention on the others, on your audience, on the people that you're trying to get the message to, is really important, because if you place your attention elsewhere, then it's going to make you feel less self-conscious. I think that making sure you're not holding tension, so maybe do some shaking out or some releasing, anything that kind of loosens the body, really. I think that will help. And visualizing, being kind to yourself, but also visualizing a positive outcome. Think about what, maybe use those transitive verbs I was talking about to be really clear about what it is that you're trying to do for that audience as well.